So when you're building an agentic system, you're not going to fully understand the risks. And that's the complication. How do you govern something where you don't really understand what's going to happen? You have to take the entire governance construct from the outside, and you have to put it inside the system. There can't be any separation. Governance is actually lost. Because of agentic systems, they are unforgiving. You can't approach an agentic system with technical debt. It will drift immediately. It's a wrong mindset. If you have a set of policies and there's a policy missing, the agent is not going to tell you there's a policy missing. The agent is going to think, okay, there's something missing. I'm still going to make a decision. So you commission your thinking and you bring the context into your middleware. And that's an absolutely essential component of the reference architecture. You can't build an agentic system if you don't have the middleware systems. I mean, imagine that you have an agent from the government and you have an agent from an organization and you're doing some kind of transaction in terms of tax. If it goes wrong, whose fault is it?
Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Saumitra Kalikar. Now, in the last few years, the enterprise AI conversation has evolved rapidly. Organizations are experimenting with agentic systems which can plan and act autonomously. As these agentic systems now get deeply embedded into enterprise workflows, an important question is emerging as to how organizations should effectively govern these systems and what adequate control should be in place without slowing down innovation. And that is the focus of today's conversation, how to govern agentic systems. And to help me unpack this important topic, I'm joined today by Jesper Lowgren. Jesper is the Agentic Enterprise Architecture Lead at DXC Technologies. Jesper, welcome to the podcast and great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and thank you for inviting me.
So Jesper, before we take a deep dive, I would love to start with your own journey. You have worked across enterprise architecture, AI strategy, and so on. So what shaped your journey into enterprise AI and agentic systems?
I think if we go back in time, I'm a system thinker. And when you think in the context of systems, I think you naturally gravitate towards architecture, and especially enterprise architecture. So enterprise architecture is all about systems on top of systems. It's making sure that you have an enterprise and all of the components in the enterprise that they're working together and they're creating the maximum benefit. So I was very interested in that early on, and that's how I got into enterprise architecture. I started with business architecture. That was my angle in. And then a few years ago, I came in contact with ChatGPT 3 and I have a YouTube channel, and I made my first video on ChatGPT 3. And I got almost hooked on AI immediately about the potential of what it can do if we can harness its power correctly. And of course, the real problem in harnessing the power is governance. That's the stumbling block. So I spent the last 2.5 years deeply in the AI space, both in terms of my work at DXC Technology, where I'm driving the thought leadership and IP development, etc., in this space, but also personally, my own research, my own networks, etc. So I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years really understanding the nature of an agentic system, and most importantly, how do we govern it so we can trust it that it's doing what we want it to do.
Let's start with some grounded conversation, Jesper, just to make sure that our audience is on the same page before we take a deep dive. Now, when you talk about agentic systems with your business leaders or with your customers, etc., how do you try to explain that in a more simple and practical manner? And how do you try to differentiate that with the traditional automation solutions that have been in place, including generative AI?
Yeah. And if I stray, it's a big question. If I stray, you just to bring me back again. There are a number of different ways that this can be explained. one thing that I like to use when I'm explaining to business, and I explain mainly to business leaders, not so much to technology leaders. And I'm using the agentic maturity construct. So in a typical maturity level, you have 5 levels going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 is essentially ad hoc, and 5 is optimized perfect. And then you have all these shades in between. That's a very useful structure of AI. At level 1, you would have your bot that we're all familiar with. You're going to ChatGPT, ask a question, and you get a response. And that's important for organizations because there's a lot of productivity to be gained in that, even if you can't measure it. Then in level 2, things are starting to change. This is when we talk about agents. You can have a particular agent, like an onboarding agent for a call center. If you're recruiting a new employee, and you can use AI to onboard them and train them, etc. Or you can have a policy agent that is querying policy data. So that's your single agent. That sort of fits within the concept of organizations today. You don't need a new operating model. You can take your existing governance infrastructure and you can put it on top of the agent, and it will work. It will be a little bit brittle, but it will work. The real change comes when you go into the next stage, level 3, and I'm calling that agency. And agency is a huge word in AI, and that is what makes it so different from, for example, robotic process automation. Agency is ultimately about decision rights, and what kind of decision rights can be conferred to an agent, and how do we make sure that they're sticking with these decision rights. So these are very, very new challenges in the agentic world. And then number 4, and now we're going further, we're turning on autonomy. So number 3 is agency, number 4 is autonomy. So agency is really about what kind of decisions are we outsourcing to agents. Autonomy is how far do we allow the agents to go in the decision making. So agency can be seen as a breadth, and autonomy is a depth of the decision making. And level 5 is a bit academic, so I don't think there's much point in talking about that. So when I'm explaining agentic AI to an organization, this is how I explain it. And a lot of organizations, matter of fact, everyone today are either on level 1 and level 2, and they're experimenting with agents, etc. And the biggest message I have in my conversations is that the jump between level 2 and level 3 is exponential. It is. That's when you have to change. That's when we talk about transformation instead of optimization. That's when you need to rethink your business process rather than just improving it.
Yeah, that's a good way of explaining this. And if I then apply the agent, so the governance things on top of it, Jesper, I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the organizations should be comfortable at level 1 and level 2 today. I'm going to this maturity. And what fascinates me is the AI governance itself is relatively new. It only lasts 2-3 years, and most of the organizations are a bit of maturing. They are still figuring out how to do that effectively. But at the same time, now they are actually also piloting the agentic systems and multi-agent systems, etc. Right? So what I'm saying is that there is a widening gap, so to speak, between the governance maturity around AI and the technology direction, the space at which technology is evolving. So maybe it will be good to paint a picture on how now I should say within 2-3 years already the traditional AI governance looks like. And when you then start to, in your methodology level 3 onwards, when a company start talking about the agentic and multi-agentic systems, what's the incremental governance aspect they should be considering?
Right. Let's get to the core of the problem immediately.
Yeah.
So what happens is there's this concept of emergence. So we need to stay with that for a second. And emergence can happen in 2 ways. It either happens if you're putting a number of different components together in your system, you always get emergence. And a good example is your car. If you keep on driving the car and you don't do anything with it, you only put petrol in it. it's going to break down eventually. You don't know where it's going to break down. You don't know the component. You can't actually predict, but you know that something is going to break.
Yeah.
That's called emergent behavior. The other aspect of emergent behavior that is related to free will, cognition. When we have free will, we're always going to have emergence. I mean, that's the nature of free will, is to think independently.
Mhm.
When you're putting these two things together, we're getting emergence on steroids. And it gets worse. And this is really the crux, is that when you're connecting all of these agents, let's say that you have 5 agents or 10 agents, and they're not sitting on their own doing things with a human in between. They've actually been connected. They're working together. There's no human in the loop. The entire governance conversation shifts. It's not what happens inside the agents. It's not irrelevant, but it's not as important as what happens in between the agents. It is the collaboration of the agents. It's the traffic in between the agents. That is what we need to govern. And the problem here, and now I'm going to crystallize it, is that you don't know what emergent behavior is. So when you're building an agentic system, you're not going to fully understand the risks. And that's the complication. How do you govern something where you don't really understand what's going to happen, when you can't fully quantify the risks? And that is changing the picture completely. And that means that all of the old governance methods, where you have a governance team and it's sitting outside and they're looking at the result and they have the checklist, none of that. In this world, because of you have this emergence, and it happens very quickly, you have to take the entire governance construct from the outside, and you have to put it inside the system. There can't be any separation. Governance is actually the system. And I think that's the biggest thing, where we can immediately identify whether someone understands governance or not. Because if you talk about governance as an add-on, okay, we're going to build the governance agent, or we're going to build the governance layer, that shows that you don't really understand governance in the context of an agentic system.
Yeah, that's well said. And I wanted to then unpack that further in terms of understanding what are the important principles any organization should consider, governance principle, when they think of implementing multi-agent systems. Because as you said, traditional governance has always been all about control, right? In a way, a lot of manual processes around those, etc. And that's
control after the fact.
Yeah, control after the fact.
Control before the fact.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. And so it's more reactive, as you said, than being proactive. But that's not going to work in the agentic multi-agent work, right? So when organizations who are used to that kind of governance model, and now they're actually thinking of multi-agent systems, etc., if you are to think of what are the key principles or guardrails they should be thinking of in terms of changing the way they do govern, can you paint a picture as to what are the new things they should be thinking of?
Yeah, I can. And it's actually quite big. And the hardest thing here is not the technology. The hardest thing here is a mindset shift. And I think that mindset shift has been talked about throughout this entire digital transformation journey that we've been on for the last 15 years or so. But I think now it becomes real, because the agentic systems are different. When you have a digital system, you actually don't need to adopt all of the digital principles. You can say, I just want a little bit of automation, and I'm happy to incur a lot of technical debt, and I can put in a lot of humans into the process, and the process is going to work. It will be expensive, it will be slow, but it will work. Or you can say, I'm going to invest a lot of money, I'm going to get a lot of automation, and obviously you have less people and more of automation. That's how we think. That is how evolution takes place. We're dipping our toe in the water, and we take a lot of stuff from the old world with us into the new world with a little bit of new stuff in it, and then we try to evolve from there on. that can't happen in this space because of agentic systems. They are unforgiving. You can't approach an agentic system with technical debt. It will drift immediately. It's a wrong mindset. You actually have to tighten everything 100% upfront. And then you need to understand that if you're going to let certain areas of the system drift, you have to be crystal clear on what is going to drift and why it's going to drift, so you can get some kind of understanding of the risk when it is drifting. So it's a very different conversation. And it starts with understanding how we're designing and thinking about these systems conceptually. So in the past, we were designing a system and then we are coding it. So we are putting all of the rules and the logic actually sits in application code itself. And then after the build, we are compiling that code and we run it. And that code can access all kind of configuration data. So you can change its behavior dynamically, but the code is the same. The code doesn't change. In the agentic world, again, everything is changing. And I'm going to expand on this a bit. But in the agentic world, you don't code an agent. You don't need to code an agent. The agent is capable of coding. That's a reasonable habit. It can think and reason and do things on its own. So it makes no sense for us to take procedural logic, if then else, and give that to an agent, because the agent can do that already. So we want the agent instead to do as much thinking as possible. We want the agent to do what it is really good at. And in order to do that, there are a few things that we need to think about when we're designing the system. So there are a couple of concepts here. I'm going to go through them one by one. One of them is the concept of atomicity. We need to build atomic agents. It is so easy to say, all right, I want an agent to be able to do this. And then we want them to do this as well. So we add that onto the agent. Wrong thinking. If we give an agent two things to do, he will get confused. They might only get a little bit confused, but that's enough for drift. So an agent has to be atomic. It has to have a singular purpose, for example. So that is the design decision. The other design decision, coming back to the intelligence and the logic now, is that when we're looking at agentic AI, and I find the really good analogy is a genie in a bottle. That's really what it is. So we're pretending we have a genie in a bottle, and the genie is obviously the agentic AI. We can give the genie an instruction set and say, you can do this, or you can't do that, and you can do that. The genie is really smart. It's going to get around that, and it's going to do its own thing anyway. So we can't use the code or the logic to control the genie. What we need to do is we need to control the bottle, the genie. Exactly the same in agentic AI. We actually don't try to control the agent directly. We're building a boundary around the agent. So the word bound is a key word in agentic AI. So it's all about understanding the boundary and making sure that the agent stays within that boundary. And if it's trying to get out, we are crystal clear about why it's trying to get out, how it's trying to get out, what it's trying to achieve, so we can govern those openings to make sure that the agent is not doing what it's meant to do. Another way of putting this is to say that we are taking governance and we are building governance as infrastructure. And that's what I meant when I said before that governance is the system. It's not an ad, it is the system. So the mindset shift is really about understanding that you don't code in the same way anymore. You're really defining the boundaries, and with the boundary, you're defining the goals, you're defining the policies, you're defining the constraints, and you're defining the evidence and everything the agent needs in the periphery in order to do its job.
The term being used in the industry is governing by intent, and it's less about coding or providing very detailed instructions and procedures to the agents, but it's more about setting the objectives, setting the goals, and setting the guardrails, which are the key governance aspects in the agentic world. So, how do you see practically we should be um, thinking of setting goals and objectives for individual atomic agents that you said, so that they don't drift and they don't overlap potentially with other agents?
Yeah, you actually need systems for this, and there are different levers in controlling an agentic system. And you're right. You mentioned them already. It's your goal, it's your policy, etc. So all of these are levers that are going to control what the system does. And obviously the goal that is going to control the outcome and the policies, etc. And let's say that evidence and constraints are a kind of policy. The policy is determining the behavior of the system in order to achieve that goal. So what we need in these systems is that in the past, a policy can be interpreted by a human. If something doesn't make sense in a policy, or if it's contradicting something else, a human can resolve that. It's not easy for AI to resolve that. So one of the components of things, I'm coming to the goal in a second, is that we need a policy engine and we need a policy model, because there are going to be a lot of policies. And what happens if you have a set of policies and there's a policy missing? The agent is not going to tell you there's a policy missing. The agent is going to think, okay, there's something missing. I'm still going to make a decision.
Yeah.
What happens if you're creating a policy that is contradicting another policy? The system will drift. So governance extends much, much further in the agentic world. You actually need to govern your policy model and your policy engine to make sure that everything gets put in correctly at design time, so it doesn't get confused at runtime. And the goals are similar. So the methodology that we're using at DXC is that we are setting up a goal architecture. So we're understanding the top goal, we're understanding intermediary goals, and then we are putting those goals into context. And you have to do that, because imagine that you have two agents working together. One is maximizing profits, the other one is maximizing let's say inventory levels or customer experience. It doesn't matter. If you're putting these two agents together and they have two goals and they have no way of relating and prioritizing, I mean, you have no idea what you're going to end up with. So you need your goal structure and your goal model, where you can model all of the goals and you can create rules in between them to understand the relative importance, so that an agent can actually negotiate multiple goals because of that engine a little prioritize.
Yeah. I'd like to move our conversation towards more of the architectural aspects of agentic governance, because we have said a couple of times so far that it's not adequate to have policies just sitting on in some SharePoint somewhere, right? And it's not only also about committees, right? It cannot be reactive, as you said. In the agentic world, it has to be deeply embedded in the platform itself, right? So the organizations which are now embarking on this journey, who are started thinking of how effectively govern these agentic systems, if you want to draw a reference architecture as to what important capabilities or features they should be thinking of for effective governance, which are 4 or 5 important components come to your mind?
Right. Let's start with the most important one. And we can call it a number of different things. I'm calling it the agentic data backbone. That's my name for it. It's really an agentic middleware. The agentic middleware is absolutely essential in multi-agent systems because of the context. So what happens is that for an agent to be able to make the right decision, it needs to have the right context. If you have 2 or 3 agents working together to make a decision, they all have to have the same context. If they don't have the same context, they're going to drift. If they have to have the same context, you have 2 options. You can either put all of the context into all of the agents. So every agent is carrying the context of all the other agents that they collaborate with. That might work if you have 2 or 3 agents. If you have 10 agents, it's going to collapse. The weight of that context is going to be too heavy. So you have to pull that context out of the agent. So the agents are your cognition, your thinking, and you bring the context into your middleware. And that's an absolutely essential component of the reference architecture. You can't build an agentic system if you don't have the middleware. And the middleware, that is actually where all of the context sits, and it's serving the context to the agent. And here we're coming into another aspect of the reference architecture. A to A is an agentic anti-pattern. A to A essentially means that you have to have the same context in both agents for them to be able to talk to each other. And it's not going to work if you have many agents. So again, it's coming back to taking the context of that agent and put it into the middleware. And the middleware manages all the context for all agents. So that's a single source of truth of context. And it's just serving that to agents. So the agentic middleware is critical. There are some other things as well. And we're going to come into state machines and protocols because they are really important. And we touched a little bit before on where you are designing a system today, and then you're building it, and then you're compiling it, and then it gets executed at runtime. The agentic system doesn't work like that. There is no compilation of code. What the agentic system does, it is compiling everything at runtime. So when we're coming at runtime, it's going to look at something. Okay, I'm going to look for policy. I have to check the constraint. I have to check the permission. I have to do this. I have to do that. And based on the outcome of this runtime interpretation, either be executed or it won't. And obviously, all of that is going into a provenance record. The point is that these systems are not predictable. So that's why emergence is such a problem. Today, when you're compiling a system, you know exactly what it's going to do. It's not going to make its own code. It's not going to make its own decision. You know exactly what you get.
Yeah.
You actually don't know what happens in an agentic system until it actually runs.
Yeah.
Because you're designing the boundaries, right? You're not designing the code. You're only designing the boundaries.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what happens around the boundaries at execution time.
Yeah.
Tells us what the system is doing.
Yeah. You mentioned about agentic middleware, which is an interesting term. I'm definitely take a note of that. Now, one thing that comes to my mind is, yes, the context building is important. Also, agents need to access to different documents within the enterprise, policy documents of each other teams, right? But if an agent is serving a customer, right, for example, how does and the fact it typically is that in most of the organizations the information is scattered across multiple documents, right? You and me as humans would know what is the source of truth for a particular information, right? Agents will search information from different sources, but how would they? And that's what I'm trying to understand the governance aspect of this as well. How would they understand which is the more authority source of information that I should use to serve the customer?
It's a really good question. I can address it from a number of different angles. I'm going to come back to the state machine. So when we're designing a process today, we're literally designing the process. We stand in front of the whiteboard, we are drawing a BPMN diagram perhaps and say it goes from here, goes to here, we have a decision, and things happen. That's not what we do in the agentic world, because again, that's like coding if, then, and else. So instead, we're looking at the system as a state machine. So there are certain states that never happens in the system. And then between each state, there's a protocol. And that protocol tells you what are the conditions from going from stage to the next.
Mm.
And when we start formalizing a system this way, using formal rules behind the process and how a process is constructed, we start building more and more things on that. So we can, for example, link certain states or certain protocols into certain types of events and certain types of data and certain types of transitions. So you actually control what an agent can and can't do. It's really controlled via the state machine.
Mm.
So state machine, we know that if you're going from, let's say that you're filling a form, you're requesting a credit increase. And then there's a process happening, and then that's either being approved or it's being rejected. In this world, that is all controlled in the state machine. Every state is going to know exactly what can happen, what kind of events can take place, what kind of events can't take place, what kind of policy must be in place for something to go from requested to approved. And that's where the system will know that it is expecting approval policy 1.113, which is the latest version. And if that policy is not there, it will stop. It's a kill switch, essentially. It stops, and it will alert the human and say, there's something missing in the ecosystem. I'm expecting this policy. It's not there. And it stops. So that is how you're building the control around the agents, what they can do and what they can't do, and how to behave. It's not through prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is really anti-agentic as well, because it's just a prompt. There's no intelligence. It's almost like an unstructured data that you put into an agent. Whereas if you're using state machines and protocols, that's all structured data that you can something.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So what other aspects you think are important when you talk about the reference architecture for governance? You talked about data foundations, which is, I agree, absolutely important.
Yeah.
There are other aspects maybe worthwhile exploring, like agentic security, identities, etc.
Yeah.
Do you want to unpack that as well?
No, I want to go in the other direction because it's more it's more exciting.
Yeah.
Security, etc. Those things are relatively well thought through, I think. If we go in the other direction, other part of the reference architecture has to be something to do with ontology and semantics. So that's a meaning. Let's say, and you're going to get a laugh out of this, the word done. If you to a developer, I'm done. If you talk to tester, I'm done. You talk to business user, I'm done. Done in the context of a developer, it's a tester, a BA, a business person. It means different things. We need to lock down the meaning in the agentic system. If there's any kind of ambiguity in the meaning, it's going to drift. So one of the most important aspects of the reference architecture is to understand your ontology and your semantics, because this is the meaning layer. This is what the agents they're using for reasoning. So they're really important. And when I'm talking about ontology and semantics, the ontology are all the important terms and definitions and relationships in the organization. So if you are a retailer, for example, it will be customer, it will be product. You could say it's a little bit like a data model or an entity relationship diagram in its principle, that it looks similar, but used different. So that's your ontology. Then the semantics, that is the interpretation of the ontology. For example, the word done, it can mean different things in different stages. That's what semantics picks up. So that picks up all the different meaning and how the ontology can be used. So if you're mapping out all of that, you can be pretty confident that the agent are going to use the same meaning when I'm making the decision, regardless of where the agent is coming from. So that is your ontology and your semantics. We have talked a little bit about the policy engine already, so the policy engine must be part of it.
Yeah.
And then you will have a user experience, and you will have a front end, of course, that someone is interacting with. So that's an important part. But the most important part is definitely the data backbone, the middleware. That's what everyone is missing. Everyone's talking about agents. It's easy to build agents. Anyone can build an agent. It is putting them together and trusting them in a real environment.
Yeah.
That's difficult.
I agree. I mean, the context and memory management are emerging to be probably one of the most important topics right now. So so having that middleware definitely makes sense. Let's move our conversation towards other area where I wanted to have a discussion with you, which is around operating model and accountability of these agents, right? Now, whenever we talk about agents, one question is always asked as to, in this new world, who are going to be accountable for these agents? And particularly that is asked in the context of, if agents makes wrong decision, who is liable, who is accountable from people perspective, right? Now, in your conversations with the customers, really how big is this issue, and how do you try to solve this issue for your customers?
And I'll go a bit further than that. If we're looking at the operating model, so that's one part of the operating model. The other part of the operating model starts even earlier. So, for example, let's say that you and I work in the same company, and you want to create an agent and I want to create an agent. What are the rules for creating an agent? Who can create an agent? What kind of data can it access? If I'm creating an agent, who can review it? Who can review it? What happens if I want to change the agent? What's the process then? What's the process if I want to decommission an agent? So I think the operating model, it needs to answer a lot of questions. And you're very right in highlighting that we have the issue of the responsibility and accountability when it comes to AI agents and agentic AI. And to be really honest, I don't have a full answer on those things. I think that is something that we are still working through. Who is ultimately accountable for an agent? And in some instances, it is probably quite simple, but in some instances, I think there can be very, very, very hard questions to answer, especially if you talk about, for example, ecosystems. I mean, imagine that you have an agent from the government and you have an agent from an organization, and you're doing some kind of transaction in terms of tax that goes wrong. Whose fault is it? There are big issues.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned a little bit about the importance of trust within this agentic ecosystem, and I wanted to unpack that as well, because regardless of how advanced these systems are, how intelligent these systems are, if they do not make right decisions, that has a direct consequence on the trust that you have with the brand, right? So, how should organizations think of building that trust around that whole agentic system? I mean, what kind of precautions they can think of before these agentic ecosystems are live in productions and they start serving the real customers?
I think the first level of trust comes by doing it right in the first place. So we talked a little bit about the thing about technical dealings. Worst thing, actually, let's turn it around. The worst thing an organization can do is to cobble something together sort of as an experiment and then sharing it, and people see it not working, or it's brittle, or showing different results, and then people are thinking this is not working. So I think the first thing is that you have to find the right use case. That's what I'm saying. And you need to do that use case correctly. You're actually not testing the technical viability. It's not that hard to actually build an agent. It's really easy. The hard thing is to govern it. And the governance is not technical governance, it's business governance. So there are just so many business things here that we need to solve.
One aspect of building the trust and ensuring that the ecosystem is well trusted is ability to explain the outcomes, right? The explainability of agentic systems, and we all know that is not, agentic systems generally are not transparent, right? So how organizations can ensure there is adequate, if not 100% explainability when you are actually, these agentic systems again are serving critical business operations or customer services?
Again, but coming back to governance as infrastructure, you need to build the governance into the system itself for that to happen. And there's this concept that's called provenance, and provenance is quite big in agentic AI, and it means that we can always go back and we can understand exactly what kind of decision was made, how it was made, and why it was made. So that is what you're touching on. So we need to have the explainability. So when an agent, let's say it's perhaps a mixture of experts or a deeper agent and is doing reasoning, we need to be able to see what that reasoning is, so we can understand the thought process the agent has gone through. But it's actually much more than that. We need to, let's take a policy, for example. Policies change over time. I mean, you might have a policy that is changing every 3 months. Let's say that you have an agent that made a decision 4 months ago, and that is making that decision under previous policy. When you go in and you're looking at the decision, you need to be able to know that. You actually have to know exactly what policy, what kind of evidence, what kind of constraint exactly was applied on that agent at that exact time of decision or execution. So it's actually quite complex. It's actually quite a complex picture, because you do need to keep track of a lot of different moving parts in your provenance record in order to really understand what the agent has done across all the different areas that can potentially drift. So I think that is core to trust, is to have that holistic view and understand all of the aspects where it can play out, essentially.
Yeah. I think as we start wrapping up now, there are a couple of questions I definitely want to ask, Jesper. Now, you also have background in enterprise architecture, right? You have seen the enterprise architecture governance forums, how they function, etc. Then in organizations, there are other forms of governance, technology governance, like data governance, the privacy and the security governance, etc. In the agentic world, how do you see these forums and the processes should evolve? What is the role architecture governance or data governance and this kind of security governance, these kind of forums would play, and what value they can add?
Let's start with, I think, the hardest question first. Let's talk about architecture governance. Because architecture is changing perhaps more than any other role in agentic AI, especially the enterprise architect. So what happens is, and we have been touching on it, we are essentially moving from a world where we're deciding everything at design and build time. We are really deciding at runtime instead. And that means that as an architect, especially as an enterprise architect, instead of sitting here on outside doing my capability models and value streams and CRUDs and all of these beautiful diagrams that we are used to, they're not going to be that useful anymore, because it doesn't happen there. It happens at runtime now. So there's this really big shift. And I think the business architect and the enterprise architect are going to be the most affected, is that we are going from somewhere where I call it lag time. Mm-hmm. If you do something as a business architect or an enterprise architect, it can take a year, it can take 2 years until you actually see something in the business. If you do something as a technology architect, it is probably weeks. So you have this big lag time. And that's one reason why it's very difficult to really convince someone about the importance of business and data architecture, because it's difficult to measure. But in the agentic world, it's completely different because they don't sit on outside anymore. They actually sit in a nucleus itself. So the business architect, for example, needs to create the systems and the processes and the structure for all of the policies and constraints and evidence, etc., to make sense at runtime. That's a business architecture view. Responsibility. The enterprise architecture is going to need to coordinate everything at runtime from your technology infrastructure, data, application. These roles are changing fundamentally because of runtime is changing everything. The runtime looks very, very different in agentic AI.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so a final question probably, but if an organization is just embarking on this whole agentic journey and they're thinking of the governance to be established around it, what kind of advice you will give to the CIOs or whoever the other business counterparts as to how they should be thinking of establishing governance? And based on your experience, what are the key mistakes they should avoid?
But they can buy my book, of course, but I'm not going to flog my book here. I think that this is an area where you can't really cheat. And I've done a bit of a turn on myself and my thinking in the last few weeks. And I've come to the conclusion that it actually really starts with training people. It's not about the system. It's not about the processes. It's math. It's nothing about that at all. If I was running an organization and I was serious about doing agentic AI, I would get AI consultants in to sit with my key people and really make sure that AI is first embedded in the personal workflow. So people actually really understand what it is. There's so many people that go into AI conversation and they have never really played with it, experimented with it. They actually don't really know what it is. And I think that putting it in front of everyone and really encouraging and hand-holding people to use it so they get used to it. It's one of these base capabilities that are absolutely essential. It's like data governance that you mentioned. You can't do anything in AI unless you have data governance. It's almost a foundation that you build on. And it's the same thing. I think the first foundation, train up all your people, and not just a training course, actually get them into their technology, supervise and sit with them where they're sitting there typing into a chatbot or something and trying to improve their personal productivity workflows. I think that personal understanding is critical. And far too many organizations, they want to make the jump. They want to go to level 2 or level 3, but you really need to start at level 1.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest advice. Crawl, walk, and then run.
And yeah, good advice, Jesper. And on that note, thanks for joining Enterprise Tech Talk. This was a fascinating conversation, Jesper, and I'm pretty sure our audience will really get benefited by your insights. So thanks again. Thanks for joining, and it was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Have a great day.
If you found this discussion valuable, please follow and subscribe to Enterprise Tech Talk. And thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.